Chapter 1. The Summoning. At first, the summons was only a low harmonious buzz, but for days it filled John's mind relentlessly. Soon the beckoning became an enchanting hum. Then it became a faint song that only vaguely mimicked words. With each steep rocky journey that he made to the cavern, the song had become more distinct and his dread fiercer. Each time he had stood exhausted behind two large intersecting dry bushes at the cavern's mouth, he would shake as the stench of sulfur dioxide drifted over him. 3 months of weekly trips and little nourishment had thinned his tall 32-year-old frame so that the moonlight, when it was present, barely cast his shadow. This time, the song drew him with an irresistible power, for he heard the voices of angels. Neither fear nor the fetid stench could repel him, for he had heard the voices of God's choir, and he would answer. For the first time, he ventured up the slope and into the bushes. The dry, brittle branches scraped his bare arms and face as he pushed through. As the final branch sprung from his arm and scratched across his cheek, in front of him, a thin fissure outlined in yellow crust spread into a narrow opening. While he grasped the small gold cross that lay against his chest, he ran his fingers across the yellow crust. Its warmth startled him. He yanked his hand back. His fingers, covered in yellow dust, stung lightly. He wiped off the sting on his pants. John turned sideways and moved slowly, the sides of the rough rock walls lightly cutting his arms. For 20 feet, he continued to shuffle sideways down the dark tunnel. The smell was overpowering. He felt dizzy and nauseous. He could taste bile in his mouth. The tunnel got hotter. Sweat dripped into his eyes and down his face. The sulfur dioxide mixed with sweat and stung his eyes. He wanted to wipe it away, but the narrow tunnel prevented him from raising his hands to his face. Suddenly, the tunnel bent to the left and became wide enough and tall enough for him to stand straight and face forward. A bright, orange light filled the last 50 feet of the tunnel. Blinking and wiping away sweat, he traveled down the long, brightening tunnel. After 5 anxiety-laden minutes of cautious steps, the long tunnel opened into a large domed cavern. 30 feet in front of him churned the molten pool of lava, which had been lighting his way. On the walls were petroglyphs. As if they were commanding him, he turned around and around staring at them. Dizzied, he stopped. He stared at one petroglyph, and without thinking or knowing why, he murmured, "Topilo." Rising from the pool of lava and onto the wall in front of him, an enormous shadow of a winged creature with swept-back horns appeared. Its wings flapped 5 times, ripping them from the wall. The petroglyphs began to move up the walls to the apex of the cavern. They swirled around the creature's head and flowed back down the wall, layer after layer building on top of the previous one, each making the cavern darker. A dense black wave rolled across the ground and over the lava. The shadowy winged creature vanished in the wave. The cavern suddenly grew cold. As terror engulfed John, he reached for his cross. He felt its warmth and power. God would protect him if his faith were strong enough. God had called him here, he was certain. God had wanted him to see this creature, to believe in it, and ultimately to serve it. For John, this was not an evil creature, it was the tool of God's wrath, his hellfire. All John had to do was trust the summoning as God's will. With his first step toward the edge of the seething pool, the terror began to drift away. As he wandered closer, he could hear the lava churning nearby beneath the black. Bolstered by his faith, he stepped without hesitation over the boiling sound. A round pedestal rose beneath his feet, lifting him above the lava. From around the pedestal, giant, black wings with their bones etched in fire rose rapidly from the lava and wrapped around him. The fire soared, flashing from bright orange, to red, to blue to white. He found himself weightless, suspended in infinite white space. For the first time, he heard a distinct voice. It was harsh, yet enticing. The language was only vaguely familiar, and while he could not define the words, he instinctively felt their meaning. In minutes, the voice had drenched his mind with a horrifying vision. He was thrown from the white space onto the cavern floor. The vision that he had seen, the command he had been given, backed him out of the cavern. He couldn't obey the command. It was unthinkable. He ran aimlessly until his burning lungs and throbbing legs could carry him no further. He looked back expecting to see the fire-etched, black wings descending, carrying death with them to punish him for his defiance. As he gazed into the darkness, every muscle and sinew froze. Out of the hollow darkness, a hawk screeched, breaking the trance. As he fumbled with his keys, he turned and stumbled the final 50 yards to his car. He pushed the open button on the key. He grabbed the door handle. He heard the flapping of wings and felt the rush of air streak past his ears. He was slammed against the door. A piercing pain in his neck sent him to his knees. He struggled to his feet. He was spun around. In front of him stood the dark outline of a man. The man looked at him and whispered one word. Paase. With the last syllable, John's pain vanished. With a screech, wings unfolded from the back of the dark outline, and with a single flap, it hurled itself up into a still blackening night. He scrambled into his car. Exhausted and terrorized by the vision he had been given, he frantically drove home. He couldn't do what his vision had commanded. It was too much to ask, but God had asked it. He grabbed his cross. Was this a test of his faith, his commitment to God? He squeezed the cross until it cut into his fingers. With his thumb, he rubbed the blood on his fingertips. It felt soothing. He glanced at the blood, and the impulse started again. For 4 days he had resisted an ill-defined, growing impulse, but still he returned to the cavern where each day the compulsion became stronger. This time it was more tenacious than ever. During the entire trip home, the compulsion was growing in him. It was not going to be denied. He had not been able to sleep for 3 nights. This night was no different. He sat on the edge of the bed. He heard the whisper again. Paase. He rose and followed the voice. It molded his mind to its will. He stood at the bathroom sink, looking at himself in the cabinet mirror. A work schedule taped to the left side of the mirror only measured the days of work he had ignored. Reflected in the mirror to the right of him hung a foot-tall crucifix on the wall behind. The crucifix blurred. Tantalizing ripples moved up and down, drewing him. His mind began to drift, his thoughts numbed. Again, the compulsion grabbed him. It had him completely now. He opened the cabinet mirror and pulled out a narrow old box of odds and ends. He pushed aside needles, pins, thread, and buttons until he found an old razor blade with an uneven tinge of rust along the edge. He looked at the razor, made the sign of the cross, and solemnly said, "This is the hand of God." When he looked up, he barely recognized the emaciated man in the mirror. No longer could he see the delicate features, which his father regretted and his mother loved. His skin pulled tight against his cheekbone and sunk in just below it. His thin lips wrinkled around his mouth. The gray around his eyes grew nearly black near his nose. He put the razor blade in his left hand, and guided by a force not his own, he moved the blade to his face and began to make shallow cuts on his skin. Each new incision elicited a wince as a sting that washed through him. Each sting became a mesmerizing, necessary pain to cleanse and purify him to fulfill the vision. From an inch inside the hairline at his left temple, he incised 2 rows that ran above the eyebrows, across his forehead, and an inch into his right hairline. The blood ran along his eyebrows, dripped from the ends, pooled in the eyebrows, and fell in distinct drops. As he made row after meticulous row of precise 1/4-inch long dashes, small drips began to roll down his eyes. He blinked them away. He etched another 4 rows from his eyes to his ears. Then from ear to ear and across the cheeks and the bridge of his nose, he made the final 2 rows. Blood flowed down his cheeks, ran along his jaw line, gathered at his chin, and spilled into the sink, making small rivers down the side and puddling around the drain. The front of his t-shirt was crimson from the neck to below the chest. Only a small patch at the bottom remained white. He set the razor blade on the edge of the sink and gazed into the mirror. Blood coated his eyes. Dark red covered his cheeks and neck. He put both hands flat over his eyes and cheeks and cringed under the pain. He wiped the blood straight back into his hair as he said, "Sic it, fake it. Absci liberis. Mulieris gladius. Tus sic absci liberis." Erit inter muliers. Mater tua. The pain diminished. He repeated the gesture over and over, each time solemnly repeating the words as if they were a necessary ritual for the task to come. Each time he was rewarded, the pain and bleeding lessened. With the final gesture, the blood dried. He picked up the razor blade and gazed at it as if it had been a foreign object, which had never been connected to his hand. Rather, it was purely an instrument to prepare him to obey God's command. He dropped the razor into the bloody sink. It settled in a stream of blood on the side of the bowl and slid to the edge of the drain. He stared at the bloody, rusty edge. He choked at the sight. He raised his head and looked into the mirror. His mutilated face horrified him. He grabbed hold of the sink and gagged. He did not want this. Then, uncontrollably, his hand moved. He clutched the cross hanging from his neck. He felt the sticky blood. He set the cross on his tongue and savored the taste. The blood of Christ, he whispered. He had been transformed. His image no longer horrified him. He saw retribution in it, the face of God's wrath. Whoever he had been was gone. He felt no pain. He muttered, I am the gatekeeper. I am Paase, guardian and servant of Tapilo. I am the hand of God. He could now take the first step of this dark journey. The final look in the mirror showed a face darkened with dried blood. A mask from behind which he would seek retribution. The sliced, crusted blood face, the bloody clothes created the image of a blood sacrifice, natural and necessary. In his black socks, shoes, and bloody black pants, he walked to the door of his one-room apartment. On a small table where he always placed his keys and his red work vest, he picked up a plastic bag. He tore open the bag, pulled out a black hoodie, neatly folded the bag and laid it on the table. As if he were performing a ceremony, he pulled the black hoodie on over his head, letting it rest against the wetness of his crimson t-shirt. It felt comfortable. He pulled the hood over his head, took the drawstrings in his right hand and pulled until only his eyes and nose were exposed. When he opened the door, he knew that his path was irreversible. He made the sign of the cross, walked out the door, and without looking back, closed the door behind him. It was midnight. Chapter 2. Seattle. Wet. Cold. What's new? It was 6:22 a.m., Monday, December 9, 2007. As had become typical in Seattle for the past week, the air smelled like rain. Detective George Parker hated a damp crime scene and all the problems it spelled for him and the forensic team. He knew that at any second the morning could be washed away by a second storm that the wind was driving in ahead of schedule. He wasn't concerned about where he parked or whose toes, literal or figurative, that he stepped on. By nature, he was intense, focused and relentless. From the moment of his birth he had to be in order to survive. Baby George Parker exploded from his mother's womb on the side of Highway 12, just east of Mount St. Helens on May 18, 1980 at 8:32 a.m. His birth was accompanied by the violent, earth-shaking, rumbling roar of Mount St. Helens, followed by a rain of ash, lava, and rock. A rescue helicopter spotted his mother's car on the 19th at noon. When the rescuers arrived at the car, they found Parker in his mother's arms with the umbilical cord still attached to his mother. She was dead. His father was found covered in debris a mile back up the road. Baby George loitered near death's door for 2 days before he decided that he had important things to do and death would just get in the way. From that day on, the nurses said that they had never seen a baby fight so hard for every breath. The determined child was relentless then, and today was no different. As Detective Parker approached, an officer made a lane through the small gathering and pulled the crime scene tape up. Parker glanced at the officer's badge number, and searched his memory for a matching name as he ducked under the tape. After the tape fluttered down behind him, he stopped, and scanned the scene. "Well, Sergeant Russell, I wish I could say it was nice to see you again." "Right, Detective, nothing quite like working a murder scene at a family planning clinic. Ironic, isn't it?" The clinic was an off-white, single-story, flat-roof, uninspiring 1960s stucco structure. It had been chosen to attract as little attention as possible, which was a futile attempt considering the reason that the clinic existed and the people who wished to see it extinguished. It was clear from the smell that the building had just received a fresh coat of paint. Under it had been several spray-painted messages intended to frighten patrons away from the clinic. This was the fourth new coat in the past 4 months. The only thing that identified the building was a 3-inch-high name printed on the door. He quickly scanned the scene. Between him and the crime scene a group of 4 officers stood talking. 10 feet from the crime scene stood a woman. Parker recognized the shoulder-length light brown nearly blonde hair. His eyes drifted down her back to her feet to confirm the identification. There they were, the practical black walking shoes. It was her all right, practical from head to toe, beautiful from head to toe and unforgiving from head to toe. He took a deep breath, set his mind for the harsh stare and words he was about to receive, that is if she would even talk to him. He walked up next to her and waited. She was feverishly writing in her notebook, flipping the page, and drawing. When her head turned toward him, he received what he expected, a tightened jaw and a deep frown. "So, what do we have here, Lindy?" "That's Detective Martin, Detective Parker." "Oh, so we're back to that again." "Back to what?" "Back to getting a little testy." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Okay, then irascible, cranky, grouchy, petulant, ornery, cantankerous. Let me know when I'm getting close." She etched her glare deeper. Seeing her annoyance and finally realizing that he might have already passed it just by showing up, he backed off. She had been trying to avoid him for months, which in a large building wouldn't seem to be difficult. However, homicide is homicide, and they were both homicide detectives. Still, it didn't take long for him to notice that she only acknowledged his presence when others were around. Sitting downtown among the skyscrapers there were many avenues of ingress and egress to the building, and he marveled at how adept she had become at avoiding him outside the department. He recycled his approach. "Let's start again." Then with emphasis, he said, "Detective Martin, what do we have here?" "A dead body." "Could you possibly give me a little more detail or should we hold a séance?" The humor didn't work. Then again, he knew that sarcastic humor and women don't get along, especially this woman. Lindy's cold shoulder had now frozen completely. "Suit yourself," she muttered and turned her head away from him. Parker rolled his eyes, another thing women didn't like, and stepped safely away from her and up to the 2 uniformed officers in front of him. They had been the first to answer the call. "Go easy on her, Parker. She had a 4 a.m. Ashley call," Officer Lendl whispered. One word, Ashley, had offered a complete explanation. Ashley was too girl, too beautiful, too clever, too rich and too well connected. Inevitably, she would need to be rescued from her own 2 poor decisions. So, as a special consideration to Mayor Barkley, Ashley's father, Ashley was given a phone number to call when she needed a lifesaver thrown her way. When she did, Lindy would dutifully clear up the problem and if necessary clear the booking record. Ashley looked at her as a great friend, a confidant. However, no matter what Ashley thought about their relationship, Lindy always held her in low esteem, but a necessary rung in the career ladder. Lindy always answered the call and always regretted it. Parker looked at Officer Lendl and just louder than a whisper retorted, "I think the bitchiness goes a lot deeper than a morning with Ashley." Lendl smirked and pointed to the building. Blocking the front entrance was a sheet-covered body. As near as Parker could tell, the body was face down a foot in front of the entrance to the Richter Family Planning Clinic. From the size of the body, it was either a small man or a woman. "Who covered the body?" he calmly asked. Surprised, Officer Lendl turned toward the detective and replied, "We were the first on the scene. I checked for a pulse, but it was clear that she was dead, so we didn't touch anything." The other officer, Stansfield, confirmed, "We found it that way, so we left it. No one here seemed to know who covered the body. We were waiting for you and the crime crew. They'd better be here shortly or we're looking at a washout." Parker looked up at the darkening clouds. "Russell," he called. Russell trotted over. Parker tossed him the keys to his car. "Grab the blue tarp out of the trunk of that old Buick and hustle it over here." He pointed to one of the 2 loves of his life, a 1953 black Buick Special convertible. The other love was the wood-frame British car, the Morgan. Russell enthusiastically snatched the keys out of the air, turned and stepped toward the car in one motion. It was an unimportant responsibility for a rookie, but it was the name recognition that felt important. The most respected detective in the department had remembered him. That wasn't by mistake. Parker had that unique ability to hear or see a name, or badge number, match it with a face and never forget it. It was a knack that made everyone that he met feel special. It was also a curse. He could never forget anyone's face and name, and that made their departure or death harder. He liked people and could not remember hating anyone since that Buddhist monk stopped him on the street 7 years ago. The monk wasn't asking for anything except directions, but before their encounter had ended, an hour had passed and Parker had the address of the temple in his hand. He never went to the temple. He was an avowed atheist. However, he found himself in the library reading up on Buddhism, especially the writings of the Dalai Lama. The first book, Transforming the Mind, had a profound effect on him and markedly transformed his stint as a patrolman. He was calmer and more understanding, so his encounters were more productive. After the first week, he decided that this Buddhism thing had merit. It had changed his mind, and it had changed his life. He was certain that his rise to detective in a short time was a result of the profounder understanding of life that the Buddhist teachings had given him. Even though he never went to the temple and was still an atheist, some part of him became Buddhist. He could still bite off the head of a snake when unavoidable, but he would do it without malice and with calm detachment, and there would be a purpose to it. Thus, he would seek out the monk from time to time and talk about the nature of humankind, crime, and most of all, death and dying. Parker would always walk away with a tidbit of wisdom that calmed the turmoil in his mind. That, in turn, would help on a case, which became like meditation for him. It focused his mind and his energy. Russell returned with the tarp, unfolded it, and was about to spread it over the body when Parker put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't want to contaminate the crime scene more than it already is, Mr. Russell." Parker felt the first drops. "Lendl, Stansfield, time to prove you are a pillar of the community. Grab a corner. Pretend you are a post." Each grabbed a corner, and Parker took up the slack between the two. They made a lean-to with the tarp protecting the scene from the wind-driven rain. 2 minutes later, the sprinkle turned into another hard Seattle rain, the kind that washes kittens and chihuahuas down the storm drains. 3 minutes later, Parker could see the strain on their faces. "Harder than you probably thought. Here's the trick. Relax, breath shallow, and put yourself in a trance." Their expressions said it all. He was strange, from the corny pillar of community attempt at humor to the zen breathing crap. If he hadn't been a detective, they would have told him to F.O. "If you'll notice, you're straining, and I'm standing here as if I was waiting for a bus. Just try it." Lendl did. His pain eased and he looked surprised. Stansfield was stubborn and now groaning. "Thank God they're here," Lendl said as he lowered his arm. "We're not done yet, men." A collective moan rose. Parker smiled. The forensic investigators quickly set up a canopy and moved it into place as the human lean-to collapsed from exhaustion. "Officers, you have been great pillars of the community, or at least an adequate canopy, thanks." Lendl was still muttering to himself about how much easier the task had become in a relaxed state. Stansfield moaned, rolled his eyes, and as he walked away muttered, "Glad to be of service, Detective Lotus Blossom." Parker knew that it was a derisive muttering, but it didn't bother him. In fact, he just added it to his collection of nicknames, Detective Foo Foo, Detective Buddha Boy, and a popular derivative of Detective Lotus Blossom, Detective Lotus Petal. The Buddhist philosophy had allowed him to take the names as badge of honor. "Thank you. Detective Lotus Blossom will write a little note of appreciation to your commander." Parker smiled. Stansfield rolled his eyes again. When the forensic team started wrapping up, Parker moved in for a closer look. Melinda, a short, pudgy, remarkably intelligent Latino from El Salvador, had just pulled the sheet back over the body. "So, what's the diagnosis, Melinda?" Parker asked. With only a slight accent, sometimes completely unnoticeable, she said, "Well, she's certainly dead, but until I get her back to the lab, I won't have a definitive answer. Give me what you've got. It's not pretty. It is the worst I've seen in a long time." She pulled the sheet away. The woman was fully clothed in a long, plain, black dress. Tiny, faint gray spots were spread sparsely on the dress. Parker sniffed the air. "What's that smell?" "Ah. So you noticed it. Very good. It's really faint, but it's very distinct. I've smelled it someplace before," Parker said. "Probably in your chemistry lab in high school. It's sulfur dioxide. It's more like the horrors I saw in El Salvador during the drug wars," Melinda said. Parker's head jerked back. "Damn. What the hell?" Melinda glanced up at him. "Took you a while to notice that. Her head is on backwards. It was wrenched 180 degrees, so whoever did this was very strong. The skin on her fingertips has been removed." She raised the woman's left wrist, bent the hand forward, and pointed. Next, her wrists and ankles had been tied very tightly. That left significant bruising and abrasions. Parker knelt on one knee. He could feel the rainwater soaking through to his knee. "She also has markings around her neck. So, she was strangled. Not by someone's hands, there's not enough bruising. And the bruising doesn't match the use of a ligature. Whatever it was, it might have been something used to restrain her. I can tell you this, she struggled a lot. So, the strangling wasn't the cause of death. I'm not sure, but I don't think so. So, it was the broken neck. I don't think that did it either. Not enough blood around the neck. I suspect that she was dead before he pulled a chubby Checkers. Oh, I get it. He did the twist. Horror and humor. You're one sick woman. It's either that or cry, and I wouldn't want my tears to contaminate the body. So, wait." Melinda reached across the body, grabbed the woman's shoulder and turned her over. She pulled the dress up and looked over at Parker. As if he had been hit by a bolt of lightning, Parker stood, rigid. Jesus, Mary, Mother of God. What the hell? What he was staring at was unbelievable, but he could not deny that it was real. The pubic hairs around her vagina had been shaved. Her vagina had been sewn shut. Racing through Parker's mind was a clutter of thoughts, none of which stayed for more than a second. Melinda continued. "Do you believe it? Whoever did this has to be demented and perverse." Parker took a deep breath and gathered his scattered thoughts. "So, we know this guy is a sadist. That's only half the story." Melinda lifted the legs of the woman so that she could pull the dress higher. Her abdomen had a 15-inch cut near the bottom, and 2 long cuts on either side that formed a flap, which had been carefully sutured. "Why is there so little blood?" "I think she was exsanguinated first." "What else can you tell me?" "We've got to get the poor young lady back to the lab quickly. There's already been too much contamination. This downpour is just making it worse." "So, what was the time of death?" "At least 15 hours, but not more than 20 is my guess so far." "So, she was killed and mutilated somewhere else and dumped here," Parker said. "Brilliant, detective. Now I see why you were promoted." "Yes. I'm a deep thinker." "A deep something for sure," Melinda said with a wry smile. "Aren't you going to ask me what time she was dumped here? What are you, clairvoyant?" "No, just damn smart." "Okay. What time?" "After 2 a.m. and before someone found her." "How do you know that?" "According to Officer Russell, who was on patrol, it started raining around 2 a.m. "And that means what?" "Since the entire area underneath her is very wet, she had to have been dumped here after 2 a.m. "You are smart, aren't you?" "Damn right," Melinda said. "I'll be at the morgue waiting for you," Parker said as he turned and headed toward his car. Melinda's crew knew that preserving the crime scene had become a fruitless effort, but they tried anyway. But try as they might, the water never stopped coming and the evidence never stopped heading down the sidewalk and into the gutter. By the time the body was loaded into the coroner's van, the deluge had begun, and so had the profanity. Basically, The only forensic evidence left was a bloodless body that had first been washed by the rain and then had debris from the sidewalk washed onto it. At the yellow crime scene tape, Parker was hailed from behind by a voice that he had hoped was too busy interviewing people at the scene to bother him. "Where do you think you're going?" Parker knew that his next act would anger the hell out of Lindy, but she deserved it. It was too damn early in the morning. He hadn't had time for his morning shower. The last time he had eaten was noon yesterday. He was still chief detective in the department for another few weeks, and in anticipation of taking his place, Lindy had been treating everyone abominably for a month. The troops had been cringing at her very presence, but since it was against the code, no one had snitched to the boss, Captain Johnson. Antagonizing her was completely avoidable, but at 6:30 in the morning, Parker hadn't activated his Buddhist calm yet. Besides, she had become a runaway 100-car freight train, and someone had to put on the brakes before she derailed and spread a toxic atmosphere throughout the department. So, he tilted his head back, rolled his eyes, sighed loudly, and, keeping the pose, turned to face her and announced, "I don't think I'm going anywhere. I know I'm going to the coroner's lab to find out what killed this woman. Look, this is my investigation. I was on the scene first. If you think for 1 minute..." Parker applied the brakes. "Detective Martin, if I had known we were playing dibs, I would have gotten here sooner. By the way, how did you get to the family planning clinic so quickly? I had a hell of a time finding it." It was a harmless question, but it hit a sore spot, a spot about which Parker was unaware. She rushed up a hate-filled stare and shouted, "What the hell business is it of yours? Just stay the hell away from my case." Then with snotty emphasis she added, "Parker." She hoped that would bother him. Back when they were intimate, she had called him Georgie, and she was the only one who did. In fact, Parker had not heard his first name, George, or any form of it spoken by his colleagues since he joined the force. That is, with the exception of his first day as a detective. That time and only that time an aging detective called him George of the Jungle, but so few of the younger officers knew the reference that it died on the spot. Of course, it might also have died because no one could remember anyone liking the old detective, a man with the disposition of a viper that was trying to swallow his fresh kill whole. He was an asshole of unprecedented dimensions, and there's a simple restriction about assholes giving nicknames. No one accepts nicknames given by assholes. So, Parker remained Parker to everyone except Lindy, who had, lovingly but privately, christened him as Georgie. Now, Lindy even despised him as Parker. Expecting a harsh response from Lindy had become the standard. Nonetheless, knowing that, Parker had still decided to poke the snake, and naturally it had struck. The smart move at this point would have been to absorb the forthcoming blows and walk away. Surprisingly, she didn't strike again. Her hate had coiled her so tightly that she had cramped and frozen. Parker had been lucky. He walked to his car with only a touch of her venom in his blood. Before Parker slid into his car, he slipped a gaze at her. She hadn't moved, not even a tightly clenched muscle. He knew that somehow, someway he would pay for the avoidable confrontation. Then, as if he wanted to have her fangs driven into him, he sat for a minute before he turned the key. He looked in the rearview mirror and berated himself. Foot in mouth, head up ass. Uncomfortable, isn't it? Too late to pull it back now. You're going to have to live with it for the next few weeks, so, gird your loins, Detective Lotus Blossom. Then again, he might get lucky. She might try to avoid him. Or she might want to make his final 3 weeks a living hell. Over the past 2 months, she had certainly become well practiced at it. If he wasn't careful, castration could be in his future.